who invented most of what we tend to call civilization, who invented all those things that we tend to attribute to a sophisticated and refined society. Everybody knows the answer: the Romans. They built magnificent buildings and also engineering masterpieces, all those water aqueducts. They had flowing hot water in their luxury villas. The layout of their metropolises sometimes surpassed even our modern one due to the precise planning beforehand. This is the impression about the Romans created by the history textbooks and the TV documentaries. But even if millions or even billions believe a certain story, this by itself is not a proof that this story is true. So let's look at the actual archaeological evidence available and decide together, are there any grounds to believe this story or not? First of all, the architecture. The people considering themselves respectable academics define the Roman architectural style as simplified ancient Greek style. While making a rough copy of your neighbor's house can be barely classified as anything innovative, not to mention how questionable the very term of ancient Greek culture is by itself, taking into consideration that we have much greater number and far more impressive so-called ancient Greek ruins outside Greece. But what I find most interesting is that those very same so-called academics also say that the ancient Greek civilization appeared on the ashes, rose from the ashes of older cultures, like, for example, the Mycenae. Now, at the actual archaeological digs at the Mycenae sites, they not only found full-fledged water supply and sewage systems, but they had running hot waters even on the second floor of their buildings. So it wasn't, after all a product of the Roman genius, as the History Channel is loudly trying to assure us. Everything was already there in a culture that, according to that very same History Channel, met its final collapse some at least 1000 years before the Romans even appeared on the historic scene. And then they classify the Mycenae as a Bronze Age civilization. Bronze Age? Then how do you explain the machine tool marks, the high-tech tool marks on the lion gate, their main symbol? Similar tool marks are found all over the complex of Mycenae, and all those Bronze Age tools that you see in the museums in big abundance are not capable of producing anything remotely similar to this. The tools and techniques used here were the same as those used on the famous Egyptian and Peruvian megaliths. After the stones were placed or cast out of geopolymer, we don't know yet, after that they were shaped with a tool with one single stroke, so to say. We have not yet developed such modern portable tools which are so powerful that with a single stroke you can shape rows of stones at the height of a couple of stories, couple of floors. Such tool marks don't go well with the general idea that we are given about the Bronze Age, and that is why they don't show you such images on the History Channel. Now let's return to that famous Lion Gate, which has become like an emblematic symbol of the very meaning of Mycenae. It's a completely different style than everything surrounding it and appears to be broken even before they placed it. Probably it was an antique already when they made it a main symbol at the entrance of their city. It is of style commonly found in Asia Minor, especially at sites that are extremely ancient, sites that have abundance of such high-tech tool marks as well. The lions of Mycenae also appear to have a cutting done with a tool that is definitely not Bronze Age. To be frank, I don't see any grounds whatsoever to consider the Mycenaeans even a separate culture, what to speak of the impressive label of civilization. It is extremely unlikely that they invented anything at all as well. After all, we see here a degradation in terms of techniques and tools compared to the older megaliths from where they took their lion figures. And whatever they built wasn't of unique style of their own. Such cyclopean walls are commonplace for the Mediterranean region and particularly Italy. This is the cistern of Mycenae. It is built in a style very common for Italy and especially for Sardinia.
The Mycenaean symbols, their griffins, are in no way unique or peculiar to the region. They greatly resemble the griffins worshipped and revered all over Asia and Europe.
Such high-tech tool marks are not found on Mycenaean sites exclusively. They can be spotted at a number of so-called ancient Greek sites. And here, every well-read penguin will tell you, oh yes, we know all that long ago. Of course, ancient Greek sites are often built on the basis of an older places of worship. And academics still argue who were exactly the people before that. Still argue? Let them argue to their heart's content, but why they're not telling the facts to the people, the facts about what they have actually excavated? Namely, up to 6 successive layers below each other, some of them eroded, means the building on the top was built after the previous one was already eroded. That means great spans of time in between the layers. And most importantly, with each successive and deeper layer, the quality of masonry work increases considerably. And it is not just the size of the megalithic blocks that gets bigger as the layers get lower and lower. Also the precision of the quality of the masonry work and the chances of spotting high-tech tool marks, they also increase with the deeper layers. In other words, gradual degradation is clearly visible. Instead of that, they're bamboozling us with talks about discovering and innovating. And it is not just the false propaganda. They also actively cover up the valuable artifacts of the old civilizations. Here you see some cutting tool marks are barely visible. The lower layers are submerged under modern asphalt or whatever, cement. And all that is going under the misleading slogans of preservation and restoration. In reality, most of what the general tourist would see on the so-called ancient Greek sites are modern buildings, some of them artificially aged. And at locations where the so-called restoration has not yet managed to erase all traces of the real old stuff, we see things like this, for example, protrusions on the stones, identical to the protrusions found on the Peruvian megaliths, the pyramids in Egypt, Baalbek, the French aqueducts. And it was the same folks who built them all over the world. It wasn't the Bronze Age savages who didn't know what's beyond their village. This is a polygonal megalithic masonry from Greece. You will find almost identical patterns in Alajujuk in Turkey and in Cusco in Peru. These are clamps used on the megalithic sites in Greece, identical to those used in South America, Africa, Asia, Europe. So let's get back to the original question. Did really the Romans invent any of the goodies of what we call civilization, or not really? So what about the Roman water aqueducts, for example? built with such a precision that they are accurate to the millimeter. Interestingly enough, impressive big Roman aqueducts are found in abundance in dozens, if not in hundreds, in America, mainly in Mexico. The Penguins assure us that the colonialists built them because they cared so much for the locals. Did they? Strange that some of the aqueducts actually feed pre-Columbian cities like those of the Aztecs. It is also somewhat mysterious that the colonialists who loved the locals so much that they did time travel to Roman times to learn how to build aqueducts with them. So after these loving people met the locals, somehow a very small fraction of the local population remained alive. And I would agree that the Roman aqueducts in America would be some peculiar curiosity of history that we simply can't understand or explain if there weren't hundreds, if not thousands, of Roman artifacts found in both Americas, as we're gonna see in the episode about both Americas. I would believe that the aqueducts are some sort of strange exception if there weren't what we call European-style ports submerged in the Bahamas, along with ruins of large platforms and foundations of buildings in a similar style. So this documentary is not gonna be like, oh, it wasn't the Romans, it was actually their neighbors. No, I'm gonna touch much more fundamental problems, like the fact that we have been indoctrinated into believing so many mistaken terms in which we try to define our history that sometimes we lack even basics like the vocabulary to start investigating what actually happened in the past. For example, the cities in South America were full of Greco-Roman statues. Again, we are told it was all done by the colonialists. Which colonialists? The ones that were burning people alive just to make them Christian? The ones who devoted their entire lives to fighting paganism? We're supposed to believe that those very same people made fantastic statues of the very same gods of the pagans, inviting women barely dressed and men wearing only a vine leaf and put them on the top of their most respected social buildings in the cities. So getting back to the Romans, this is how the mass media confirms the fraudulent history already taught in school. They show you like these mosaics with girls in bikini, and they tell you, you see, they were so advanced, they even had bikini, they invented the bikini at that times. And people watch that on TV and say, yeah man, it must be true, you see the old mosaic with the bikini. Without considering that nowhere on this mosaic is written that these are the first prototypes of bikinis. It's absolutely possible that the chicks had bikini even before that. We simply don't have images older than this. Since the Romans did not invent their own Roman togas, why should we think that they invented even their Roman underwear? These are Thracian images of people wearing those very same togas, and these were cultures that predated the Romans. And these are your Roman togas, which many millions of women wear even nowadays in Asia.
And although the outfits of the Thracians and the so-called Roman togas and the saris of India are absolutely identical, people don't even notice it. They are so accustomed to simply taking the official quackademic historic labels as some sort of science that they don't even bother to question.
And I'm not talking about some minor details, the so-called mysteries, small, unexplained parts of our past. No, even the very fundamentals of the so-called history, of the official history taught in schools, does not match the artifacts, does not match the historic sites, and not only the ancient history, even the relatively recent one, as much as a few hundred years ago. For example, guess which city is this? I'll give you some clues. This was a resident of this city. This is how it looks nowadays. The answer to the quiz is Tokyo. Did you get it right? I doubt, because these things shouldn't have been there. Because when in Europe, people were building in the so-called neoclassical style, which is yet another extremely misleading label, then Japan lived in almost complete isolation from the world. So blinded in their fanatic beliefs in the academic stories about history, people just assume that they must have been built after Japan got open to the world. But is this really, possible? This means clearing up large parts, the very central parts of their traditional city, just completely demolishing all buildings. Nothing like this is recorded. But just imagine, is it really thinkable that the Japanese people, the traditional Japanese people, would have demolished their best traditional buildings without telling anybody, without recording it anywhere, bring a bunch of foreigners, which they don't trust even till nowadays, to build new centers of all their cities from scratch in a style which at that time is already going out of fashion. And this man, by the way, is Okubo Toshimichi. This is a unique photograph from a Japanese museum of one of the last royal samurais. He shouldn't have looked like that from the stories we are told by the Quackademia. This is how real samurais should have looked like. That's what people think. Well, these are actually actors. And it's not just the style that shouldn't have been there if the official history was correct.
Also, there are megaliths woven within the structure of those very same buildings that should not have been there.
And not just any megaliths, but polygonal megaliths, very much like those of Peru, Turkey, and Egypt. There is no coincidence, even the clamps match. With the clamps on the megaliths on the other continents, which the official Quackademia is indirectly trying to trick us into thinking that they are from some extremely old and forgotten civilization, disappeared civilization, lost civilization. Don't even bother to trace it. It was so far away in time. No, it wasn't so far away back in time. At least its end. Yes, the civilization might have existed for extremely long time, but its demise was very recent. And now the time has come to become aware that somebody has been seriously tampering with our history. And if we really want to know how things really were, we'll have to start recovering the true history almost from scratch. So, since we didn't have any luck with the Romans in terms of finding any actual proof that they indeed placed the bedrock of what we call civilization, let's try with some other famous ancient civilization. For example, the Indus Valley, also known as the Harappan civilization. Its most famous site probably being Mohenjo Daro. Official academics send it 4,000 years back in time. That's deep antiquity. God knows if those dates are true, because as we're gonna discover in the later episodes, anything older than 200 years is highly questionable, and anything older than 500 years is most likely pure fantasy. But let's, for the argument's sake, assume that these dates are correct. So let's see what we read in the actual notes of the archaeologists who were digging at the site. Couple of distinct periods are clearly visible. Of course, it was a long span of time, so it is normal different cultures inhabited it. So the very first layer, from the very beginning, from scratch, there was central planning. There was sewage, there was flowing water, There were wells. Everything was laid out on a plan before even the city appeared. So it wasn't chaotic, just a settlement, and then a few more people joined and decided to make a well. Oh, then let's build a house. No, central planning from the very beginning. And not only the cities were properly laid with streets straight and everything, the full civilization was centrally planned. There were factories manufacturing various goods. And it was remarkably well organized. Certain parts would be manufactured in a given city, and then transport would be organized. The full manufacturing process will continue in another city. So we are already talking about well organized infrastructure with complex components. This golden period ends abruptly by people simply dying on the streets. There is nobody to even bury them. We are told by the penguins that it is all mystery. This is a proven trick. It works to tell it's a mystery so that we can ignore the legends which tell us in detail what kind of weapons were killing people like this. And of course, now the full site is restored, improved. This situation cannot be studied anymore. The skeletons are no longer there. The destruction of the buildings also cannot be studied. Was there really an epicenter? As some say, we don't know anymore. One more evidence destroyed. Well, anyhow, and then the next culture comes and inhabits the site, Mohenjo-daro. They have difficulty maintaining the infrastructure even, which they found basically ready-made. For example, the water supply system starts deteriorating because it lacks maintenance, the public wells don't get serviced fast enough, things like that. Then as few more cultures take over the place, it progressively gets worse and worse. They cannot maintain it, and at the end, it boils down to living in torn down houses. Wherever the roof is still standing, they inhabit those rooms, and they even start using the houses in some of the quarters as burial places. In other words, the organized society has simply fallen apart, total decay. So I'm asking, where in all this do you see any progression, any innovation, any discoveries, any progress? None of that. Instead, we see a straightforward confirmation of the legends, which are, by the way, the oral history that has survived nowadays. It has survived the destruction of the old authentic books. And not only the degradation proves the legends as more reliable history than what we commonly see on TV, but also the fact that knowledge comes in a ready-made form, really exactly as the legends from all continents describe it. Somebody comes and teaches the people arts, medicine, installs social law, establishes infrastructure, teaches people how to maintain it. There were no findings suggesting that before the Indus Valley civilization in these regions there was any sophistication whatsoever, any gradual formation of anything at all. It just came in a ready-made form. And in addition to all that, this swastika symbol was found in Mohenjo-daro, an extremely ancient symbol of good luck and prosperity, which, again, strange enough, appears at various places on various continents where advanced knowledge all of a sudden appears out of nowhere.
Now, in terms of the role of organized religion in nowadays society, it seems that relatively few people actually meet God face to face after being members of a particular group. But there is something else that has been working very effectively. People's consciousness is flooded daily by numerous stories of people acting violently, led by religious fanaticism.
Because after watching TV for even a couple of minutes, one falls into the state of hypnosis. Although it is a light hypnosis, still it is, and the very definition of hypnosis is a state of high suggestibility. Well, in the episode about the religions, you will be surprised to discover that completely different times were upon us. Times when, for example, the Christianity and Islam were actually one and the same religion. As strange as this may sound nowadays, actually there are a lot of artifacts pointing in this direction. Like, for example, European kings from Russia, from Germany, wearing Arabic religious inscriptions on their helmets and on their weaponry. Quotes from the Quran are inscribed basically along with perfectly Christian-looking inscriptions. While at the same time as rulers in West Asia, which are now classified as purely Muslim, they were minting coins and depicting themselves with Christian crosses and other attributes now officially labeled as purely Christian. The official explanation for all this is that, the Christian kings, they wore these design elements for decoration without understanding their actual translation. And the German king, he just lost his mantle, and then he was wearing the Arabic one because exactly at the time he lost his, they conquered some Arabic tribe and decided to use their lovely mantle instead. Really? The German king was wearing second-hand dresses from minor tribes he had no connection with? And as far as the coins, we are told that, you see, the people who minted coins, they just decided to copy European designs without understanding what's actually on them. Really? Was there such a lack of designs all over Asia? But of course, it is very rarely needed to make such laughable explanations. In most cases, the uncomfortable artifacts simply never reach the public attention.
And even when people do notice and think, this is off, this doesn't sound right, they don't even know what to make out of that. Because they are tamed by the TV to classify it as some sort of strange mystery.
Mysterious part of our past that we cannot figure out. And another very clever trick is to always present and study the history fragmented. Everybody is restricted to their own region. For example, runic writing is found in Europe, Asia, and Africa, and maybe even some variations in both Americas. Now, as artifacts with runes are found on the territories of different countries, they are labeled as completely independent writing systems so that people don't figure out that in the past we were all part of one big family. And then you might be wondering, is it really possible that so many historians over the centuries and thousands of years have made such blunt mistakes and imagined history disconnected from the artifacts and the historic sites? How is that even possible? No, it is not possible, but the timeline that your history teacher told you in school is actually a fiction mixed with half-truth, and all that was cooked mostly during the time of the Reformation, when history as such was transformed from a science of studying the past to a method of modifying the consciousness of the masses by making them identify with what they are actually not. When people got convinced that they are descendants of savages and monkeys only, they were no longer aware that they can claim their rightful heritage as both students and children in the most direct sense of advanced celestial beings. After most of the genuine historic chronicles were burned during the Reformation, often tossed in the fires along with their authors, then a new fictional history was compiled. It was done mainly by two people, Joseph Scaliger and Dionysius Petavius. Most of what is called history nowadays is based exclusively on the work of these two people. There are claims and speculations that their works was based on old chronicles indeed, but none of these chronicles has survived till now. So basically all we can do is hope that there is some truth in it. And as far as those old Roman and ancient Greek works that are quoted and taken as indisputable, trustworthy, holy truth, well, we don't have the original of even a single one of them, but we have copies. When the small group of Jesuit monks were making the copies, they honestly wrote in the preface, "We are copying and correcting to make it fit the new history." And after each and every copy was ready, a misfortunate fire would erupt in the library and burn only the original. But the newly made copies that were laying on the next shelf always survived the fires. What a strange coincidence. If you are to discuss this issue with a modern academic, he will tell you that Scaliger and Petavius simply did not have the time and resources to provide solid proof for the historic timeline they suggested, but somehow or other they must have been using some correct old sources because their timeline has been conclusively proven to be right by the modern advanced dating methods like carbon dating, dendrochronology, and others. Well, that is one elegant explanation, and that is why the next episode will be exclusively about those dating methods. We'll see, do they hold any water actually? Because if it did hold water, then why it is a commonly accepted practice in most laboratories who do carbon dating, for example, nowadays, to require, along with every sample submitted, a sample suggested historic period to which the given sample should belong. And the suggested date is always right. Isn't that fabulous?